Good morning, everybody. This is Stephen Pugh of the Home Bible College. It is December the 4th, and we're in Daniel chapter 4. Now, in this chapter, he records the letter that Nebuchadnezzar sent to every nation. He said, "I thought it was good to show the signs and wonders that the high God has done to me." And then he recounts the vision he received and all its meaning, and how Daniel had been able to reveal its secrets. This vision was of a great tree that grew so large that its top reached heaven, and all the birds of the air nested in its branches. And then he told of a watcher, a holy one, who came down from heaven and said, "Cut off the branches and cut down the tree, but leave its stump." The stump was to be banded with an iron and brass band. Then the image changes to a man who is to be driven out of men and is to live as a beast and eat grass. He is to be given a beast's heart, and 7 years are to pass him by. This was to be done so that all men might know that the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men, and he gives it to whosoever he will, and he sets over it the lowest, the basest of men. Now this is my password. It occurs at least 4 times, I think, in the passage. The Most High rules in the kingdoms of men and gives it to whomsoever he will. Daniel was called upon to explain the dream. Daniel had to wait 1 hour for the interpretation. Daniel explains that this dream was about the king himself. Nebuchadnezzar the king would be cut down and driven out to eat grass like an ox until 7 years had passed. Only after 7 years will he acknowledge that God rules that God rules the kingdoms of men. And it was 12 months later that the king was walking in his garden and glorifying himself for all that he had done when the execution of the decree of the holy ones is carried out. He heard a voice from heaven, and he was driven out from amongst men. And he ate grass like an ox, and his hair became like feathers, and his nails like claws. And at the end of 2,520 days, his reason returned to him, and he blessed God. And so this is the subject of the letter. Wow. Now the next story moves on to King Belteshazzar, who made a feast for 1,000 guests. This is the son of Nebuchadnezzar. And they drank wine from the golden vessels from the sanctuary of the Lord in Jerusalem. At the same hour, a hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall. After searching for a man to translate the message, eventually Daniel comes and explains the message was that God has weighed him and found him wanting. The kingdom was to be divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Daniel was decorated and made third in the kingdom. But that night, Belshazzar was killed, and Darius, who was 62, the Mede, took control of the kingdom. He took control of the kingdom without a battle. What an amazing thing. Right. So Daniel the Mede set up a new form of government. There was 120 princes, and over them 3, and Daniel was over them. So Daniel now has moved from being the prime minister of Nebuchadnezzar to being the prime minister of Darius. Wow, what an amazing career Daniel had. Now Daniel was not liked, so the princes plotted his downfall. They couldn't find fault in Daniel apart from the fact of his worship of his Lord. So they appealed to the king to make a law that stated that no man was able to ask a petition of God or man unless it came through the king. They knew Daniel would never stop praying. The punishment for not obeying was that they would be thrown into the den of lions. The Medes thought that any law they passed must be kept forever and never broken. So they thought that they had Daniel, but they never reckoned on the God of Daniel. Daniel was arrested and put in the lion's den. In the morning the king called for Daniel, and Daniel answered politely that God has sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth. The king commanded that the men who plotted against Daniel were thrown into the den, and they were all killed before they even reached the floor. Then Darius wrote to every nation, telling them of God's deeds, and that all men were to worship the Lord of heaven. And of course, right at the very end, we learned that Darius, his kingdom was succeeded by Cyrus, and Daniel became the prime minister of Cyrus as well. So this is an amazing historical story. Now, there are lots of things about this passage. I could probably preach on this passage for quite a number of hours. I love the bit at the very beginning in chapter 4 where we have this letter written by Nebuchadnezzar to the whole world. A letter written to the whole world. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God hath wrought towards me. How great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. And then Nebuchadnezzar gives the story of his conversion. Now, this wasn't a Christian conversion. We mustn't think that Nebuchadnezzar became a Christian. He did become one who was a righteous man. He did become one who served and recognized God. And sometimes, in our church life or in our personal lives, we meet all sorts of people with changing fortunes. Sometimes people come to church and leave church. Sometimes people, they have great changes in their lives, and we don't know what God is doing. But we know that God is at work in the lives of people, and he is able to deal with even Nebuchadnezzar. And and the matter, verse 17, the matter is by the decree of the watchers and the demand of the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. You see, the greatest of men are only men at best. And the point is that all these kingdoms, all these empires, all these world empires, even the king upon the throne, he had to acknowledge that he was subservient to the God of heaven. And the Lord moved in the life of Nebuchadnezzar, and later he would do it with Darius, and then he would do it with Cyrus. He will move in their lives in such a way that they acknowledge that the Most High ruleth in the kingdoms of men, and he gives to men the kingdom to whosoever he will. Amazing story. I noticed the courage of Daniel in verse 22. He speaks and he says, "It is thou, O king, thou art grown and become strong, for thy greatness is grown and reached unto heaven, and thy dominion to the ends of the earth." And whereas the king saw a watcher and a holy one coming down from heaven, and saying, "Hew down the tree and destroy it, yet leave the stump and the roots." And it's very interesting in that passage that Daniel gives advice to Nebuchadnezzar as to how he is to live. He says 7 times, verse 25, will come over you until you acknowledge that the Most High ruleth in the kingdoms of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. And so he gives advice to the king Nebuchadnezzar, and the advice is this: "Wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto thee, and break off thy sins by righteousness, and thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, and it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility." Now that is the gospel of the kingdom. That is the message. It's not a gospel to the Jews, it's a gospel to the Gentiles. And it's a gospel of righteousness. They are to break off their sins, and they are to do righteousness. And it could be that if they do, the Lord will show mercy to the king. Right. And of course 12 months later, the king is walking in the garden. He says, oh, look what I've done, look what I've done, look what I've done. And there is a voice. The voice is that you will be driven from amongst men, and you will be like an oxen, until you recognize that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men. And then at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up my eyes unto heaven, and my understanding returned unto me, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honoured him that liveth forever. Does this mean that he was converted as a Christian? Well, there weren't any Christians. Does this mean that he was saved? There weren't any Christians. There were no saved people. But he was a person who came to repentance in the covenant of Noah, because he was never a Jew. You know, Nebuchadnezzar never converted, he never was circumcised, never converted to Judaism. Okay? But he says, where does he put it? He puts, and I praised and honoured him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation, and all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. And none can stay his hand, or say unto him, what doest thou? At the same time my reason returned unto me, and for the glory of my kingdom mine honour and brightness returned unto me, and my counsellors and my lords sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. And now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honour the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways righteousness, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase. And so that's the end of chapter 4. And the whole of chapter 4 then is written by Nebuchadnezzar, the Gentile king. He is the emperor of the world. The emperor of the world. Wow. So a whole chapter of the Bible written by a Gentile king addressing the whole people of the world. You know, all of this is quite amazing. Now Belshazzar is the next story in chapter 5, and he's completely astounded, doesn't know what to do about this writing on the wall. But the queen, she still knows about Daniel, and so Daniel is called, and he informs the king. He says in verse 20, when his heart, he gives the story of his father, and then he comes down and he says, and this is the writing. He says, Mene, tekel, upharsin, and this is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peres, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and purchase. In that night Belshazzar the king of the Chaldeans was slain, and Darius the Mede took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. And so Darius comes in, and the Medes and the Persians take over the whole of the Babylonian Empire, and they set up a different type of government, but they put Daniel in charge of it all. way amazing. And then lastly we have that amazing thing where they can plot against Daniel, and they plot to have him put into the den of lions, but he is still saved. And right at the very end of it, Darius writes a letter to the whole world again. Right? He says this. King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell upon the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth. He worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. And so this message, this decree, this letter went into the whole civilized world, and every single person in all the world, they learnt of Daniel and of how God delivered him from the lions. What an amazing set of passages. And then at verse 28, Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Wow. Well, God bless you. Great to talk to you. Look forward to speaking to you another day. Have a wonderful day.